They say you never truly forget the one who got away. But for Lorenzo Moretti, the ruthless don of the Chicago outfit, Sophie didn't just get away. She vanished into thin air. He spent 3 years burying her memory under money violence and a new political marriage. But fate has a twisted sense of humor. On the day he walked into a high-end bakery to taste his own wedding cake, he didn't find a sweet filling. He found the wife he thought he lost waiting tables in a stained apron. And she wasn't alone. A little girl was clinging to her leg, a little girl with Lorenzo's eyes. This is the story of a man who could burn the world down, and the woman who hid the matches. The wind off Lake Michigan was sharp enough to cut glass, but inside the gilded walls of Patisserie Le Rêve, the air was thick with the cloying scent of vanilla and desperation. Lorenzo Enzo Moretti checked his watch. It was a Patek Philippe worth more than the building they were standing in. Yet it couldn't make time move faster. He stood near the entrance, his tailored charcoal overcoat unbuttoned to reveal the slight bulge of a Sig Sauer tucked against his ribs. He wasn't supposed to be armed at a cake tasting. It was bad form, even for the underboss of the Chicago outfit. But Enzo didn't go to the bathroom without a weapon, let alone a public bakery on the Magnificent Mile. "Lorenzo, darling, are you even listening?" The voice was high, sharp, and demanding. Bianca Vitti, the daughter of the Genovese crime family boss, stood by the glass counter, pointing a manicured finger at a 3-tiered sponge cake. She was beautiful in the way a diamond is beautiful, cold, hard, and expensive. This marriage wasn't about love. It was a merger, a treaty signed in blood and buttercream to unite the North Side and South Side crews. "I'm listening, Bianca." Enzo lied, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in his chest. He ran a hand through his dark, slicked-back hair. At 34, he had the face of a Roman statue that had been chipped by war, handsome, but with a hardness around the eyes that scared children and fascinated women. "Red velvet, vanilla bean, whatever you want." "It's not about what I want, Enzo. It's about the statement," Bianca snapped, turning back to the terrified manager, a balding man named Mr. Henderson. "The fondant needs to be pearl, not white. Pearl. Do you understand the difference?" Enzo turned away. He couldn't do this. The suffocation he felt wasn't from the heat of the ovens. It was the cage closing in. 3 years ago, his life had been different. He had been different. He had been married to a woman who smelled like rain and old books, not Chanel number. 5 and ambition. Sophie. Even thinking her name felt like swallowing a razor blade. She had been a nursing student he met in the ER after a business dispute left him with a stab wound in his shoulder. She hadn't known who he was. She had just stitched him up and told him to stop getting into bar fights. They had eloped 6 months later. It lasted 2 years, 2 years of hiding her from his world. But the world always gets in. One night she was there. The next morning the closet was empty. No note. Just unsigned divorce papers left on the kitchen island. He had torn the city apart, looking for her. But she was a ghost. Eventually the rage faded into a cold, hollow numbness. "Mr. Moretti." Rocco. His head of security stepped up beside him. Rocco was a mountain of a man who spoke in grunts. "We got a car circling the block. Might be nothing. You want us to check? Keep eyes on it," Enzo said, his eyes scanning the bakery floor out of habit. Threat assessment. Exits. Civilians. The bakery was busy. Rich housewives in furs, tourists escaping the cold, and staff buzzing around in white aprons. Enzo's gaze drifted past the display case to the swinging double doors of the kitchen. A waitress pushed through the doors, balancing a heavy silver tray of espressos and eclairs. Enzo's heart stopped. It didn't skip a beat. It simply ceased to function. She was thinner than he remembered. Her honey-blonde hair, usually worn loose, was pulled back into a messy, functional bun, held together by a cheap plastic clip. She wore the standard uniform, black pants, white shirt, a stained beige apron, but she wore it with a weary slump to her shoulders that he had never seen before. Sophie. It wasn't a hallucination. He had seen her face in his dreams 1,000 times, but this was real. He could see the faint scar on her left wrist from a childhood bike accident. He could see the way she bit her lower lip as she navigated through the crowded tables, trying not to spill the coffee. The noise of the bakery, Bianca's complaining, the clinking of china, the low hum of jazz, faded into a dull roar. The world narrowed down to a single tunnel of vision. She was here, in Chicago, working as a waitress 3 miles from his penthouse. Anger, hot and blinding, surged through him instantly, followed by a wave of relief so potent it made his knees weak. She wasn't dead. She wasn't with another man. She was serving coffee to tourists. Enzo took a step forward, ignoring Rocco's confused look. Sophie. He didn't shout it. He whispered it, but in his mind it sounded like a gunshot. She didn't hear him. She was focused on a table in the far corner near the service exit. She set the tray down, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. She looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. Enzo began to move. He cut through the crowd like a shark through water. People instinctively parted for him. The aura of violence he projected was stronger than any physical shove. Enzo. Where are you going? Bianca called out, her voice shrill. We haven't decided on the filling. He didn't answer. He didn't care if the wedding was cancelled. He didn't care if the Genovese family declared war. He was 10 feet away from her when she turned around. Sophie froze. The empty tray slipped from her fingers. Clang. The sound of silver hitting the tiled floor silenced the room. Heads turned. Mr. Henderson gasped. But Sophie Clark didn't look at the manager. She looked at the man in the charcoal coat. Her face drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of gray. Her green eyes went what, filled with a terror that hit Enzo like a physical blow. She wasn't happy to see him. She looked like she was staring at the Grim Reaper. Enzo. She breathed the word, shaping her lips without sound. Hello, wife, Enzo said, his voice dropping to that dangerous velvet register that usually preceded a hit. He stepped over the fallen tray, closing the distance until he was towering over her. He could smell her now, vanilla from the bakery. Yes, but underneath it, the scent of rain. Or is it ex-wife now? You never did stick around to finalize the paperwork. Sophie took a stumbling step back, her hands coming up as if to ward him off. Please, she whispered, her eyes darting to the guards by the door, then to the patrons. Not here, Enzo. Please just leave. Leave. Enzo let out a dry, humorless laugh. He reached out his leather-gloved hand, hovering near her face before he pulled it back. He wanted to touch her, to make sure she was real, but he was afraid he might crush her. You disappear for 3 years, Sophie. 3 years? I thought you were dead. I dug up half of Illinois looking for you. And you're serving pastries. I had to go, she said, her voice trembling. You know why. I don't know anything. His voice rose, cracking the veneer of his calm. "You left a signed paper and an empty ring. Box." "Enzo, please," she begged, tears welling in her eyes. "You have to go. It's not safe." "Safe." He stepped closer, invading her personal space. "I am the safest thing in this city, Sophie. Or the most dangerous. Depends on what you tell me in the next 10 seconds. Suddenly, the kitchen doors swung open again. "Mommy!" The voice was small, high-pitched, and filled with delight. Enzo froze. Sophie flinched as if she'd been struck. A little girl, no older than 3, came running out of the kitchen. She was holding a half-eaten cookie in one hand and a tattered stuffed rabbit in the other. She had messy curls of dark hair and was wearing a pink dress that had seen better days. "Mommy, look, Mr. Baker gave me a—" The girl stopped, skidding to a halt as she saw the giant man in the coat looming over her mother. Enzo looked down. The air left his lungs. The child looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. Green eyes. The exact shade of Sophie's. But the shape of them. The set of the jaw. The dark, unruly curls. It was like looking in a mirror from 30 years ago. He looked at the child. Then he looked at Sophie. He did the math in his head instantly. 3 years gone. The child looked barely 3. The silence that stretched between them was heavy enough to crush bones. "Sophie," Enzo said, his voice trembling for the first time in a decade. He pointed a shaking finger at the little girl. "Who is that?" Sophie moved with the instinct of a mother lioness. She threw herself between Enzo and the child, scooping the little girl up into her arms. The child, sensing the sudden tension, buried her face in Sophie's neck and whimpered. "She's my daughter," Sophie said, her voice fierce, though her legs were shaking so hard she could barely stand. "She's mine." "Yours," Enzo repeated the word, tasting like iron. He didn't blink. He was studying the back of the child's head, the way her small hand clutched Sophie's apron. "Is she mine?" The question hung in the air, suspended amidst the smell of burnt sugar and fear. "No." Sophie lied. It was a terrible lie. It was a lie born of panic, breathless and unconvincing. "No, Enzo. I met someone else. Right after I left. He's gone now." Enzo stared at her. He knew every tick she had. He knew that when she lied, her left index finger tapped against her thumb. He watched her hand clutching the child's back. Tap, tap, tap. "You're lying," he whispered, the realization crashing over him like a tidal wave. "She's 3, maybe a few months under. We were together 3 years and 4 months ago. Children happen. Enzo, life happens," Sophie hissed, backing away toward the service exit. "You need to leave. You're getting married. I saw the papers. I saw her." She nodded toward Bianca, who was now marching across the bakery floor, her face a mask of fury. "Who is this?" Bianca demanded, arriving at the scene. She looked at Sophie's stained apron with a sneer of disgust, then at the child. "Enzo, why are you talking to the help? And why is she crying?" Enzo didn't look at Bianca. He couldn't take his eyes off the little girl. The girl turned her head, peeking out from her mother's shoulder. She looked at Enzo, and then, with the innocent curiosity of a toddler, she pointed at him. "Up," the girl said. Enzo felt something shatter in his chest. "Enzo!" Bianca grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his expensive coat. "We are leaving, now. This is embarrassing." Enzo ripped his arm away from Bianca with enough force that she stumbled back in her heels. "Quiet!" he snarled. The command was so lethal that Bianca, a woman raised by murderers, actually shut her mouth. He turned back to Sophie. "What is her name?" Sophie pressed her back against the wall near the kitchen door. She was trapped. "Mia," she whispered. "Mia," Enzo repeated. "My Mia." "She has nothing to do with you," Sophie pleaded, tears finally spilling over. "Enzo, if you ever loved me, even for a second, you will turn around and walk out that door. You have a new life. You have an empire. Don't destroy hers." "Destroy?" Enzo stepped closer, his voice low and intense. "You think I would hurt her? I think your life hurts everyone it touches," Sophie cried out. "Why do you think I left? I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I didn't want to bury our children." The confession hung there. Our children. She covered her mouth instantly, realizing her slip. But it was too late. Enzo's face went blank. The cold mask of the Don slipped back into place, but behind the eyes a fire was igniting. A fire that would burn down Chicago if it had to. "Rocco," Enzo said, not turning around. "Boss," Rocco answered instantly, stepping up to block the view of the curious customers. "Get the car, the SUV," Enzo ordered. "Enzo, you can't be serious," Bianca hissed, realizing what was happening. "We have a dinner with my father in an hour. If you leave now—" "The wedding is off, Bianca," Enzo said calmly. "You can't call it off. Your father will do what I tell him to do if he wants to keep his territory," Enzo said, finally looking at her. His eyes were dead. "Go home, Bianca. Send the ring back to my office." He turned back to Sophie. She was clutching Mia so tight, the girl was starting to squirm. "I'm not going with you," Sophie said, her voice shaking. "You can't just kidnap us, Enzo. This isn't a movie. People are watching." Enzo looked around. Mr. Henderson was on the phone, likely calling the police. Patrons were filming with their phones. Enzo reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a thick envelope of cash he carried for emergencies and tossed it onto a nearby table. Then he looked at Sophie. "I'm not kidnapping you, Sophie," he said, his voice softening, becoming the voice of the man she had married years ago. "But look at me. Look at my face. Do you really think I'm going to let you walk out that back door with my daughter and vanish again?" Sophie hesitated. She looked at the exit, then at Enzo. She knew the reach of the Moretti family. If she ran now, he would find her. He would always find her. "I have a shift," she said weakly, a ridiculous excuse in the face of the situation. "I bought the bakery," Enzo said. "What? I'll buy the building. I'll buy the block. I don't care." He held out his hand. It was a massive hand, scarred and dangerous, but he held it palm open, a gesture of peace. "Come with me. We talk. Just talk. If you want to leave after that, I swear on my mother's grave, I'll let you go." Sophie looked at the hand. She remembered the way that hand used to hold hers when she had nightmares. She remembered how safe she felt before she realized that the safety came at the cost of blood. Mia squirmed in her arms. "Mommy hungry," she mumbled. Sophie let out a jagged sigh. She was tired of running. She was so tired. "Okay," she whispered. "Just talk. But not at your penthouse. Public place." "Fine." Enzo nodded. "The park across the street. But you ride with me." Sophie nodded slowly. She adjusted her grip on Mia. As they walked toward the door, Enzo shielding them from the cameras and the staring eyes, Bianca screamed something vile from the cake display, sweeping a tray of samples onto the floor in a tantrum. Enzo didn't flinch. He walked out into the biting Chicago wind, his coat flapping behind him, flanking the woman in the stained apron and the child who carried his blood. But as they reached the black armored SUV waiting at the curb, Enzo's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. He glanced at it as he held the door open for Sophie. "The girl looks just like you, Lorenzo. Shame she'll never grow up." Enzo's blood ran cold. He looked up at the rooftops, his instincts screaming. "Get in!" he shouted, shoving Sophie and Mia into the back seat just as the first shot rang out, shattering the bakery window where they had been standing seconds ago. The SUV swerved violently, tires screeching against the asphalt as Rocco slammed on the gas. The impact of the bullet against the reinforced glass had left a spiderweb fracture right where Enzo's head had been a split second earlier. Inside the cabin, the world was chaos. Sophie was curled into a ball on the floorboard, her body forming a protective cage around Mia. Enzo was on top of them, his heavy frame shielding them from the windows, his gun drawn and pointed at the receding streetscape. "Stay down!" Enzo roared, though the command was unnecessary. "Mommy, mommy!" Mia was screaming a high-pitched sound of pure terror that grated against Enzo's soul. "It's okay, baby. Shh, it's okay." Sophie sobbed, stroking the girl's hair with trembling hands. She looked up at Enzo, her eyes wide with accusation. "You said you were safe. You said you were the safest thing in the city." Enzo didn't answer. He was busy scanning the mirrors. "Rocco status. 2 bogies on our 6 boss. Black sedans. No plates. They're aggressive," Rocco shouted from the front, banking the heavy armored vehicle around a corner, clipping a trash can. "Lose them. Don't go to the penthouse," Enzo barked. "Take us to the stronghold in the meat-packing district, the warehouse. The warehouse it's not prepped for. Just drive." Enzo looked down at the woman huddled beneath him. The smell of her, that familiar rain and vanilla, was now mixed with the metallic tang of adrenaline. He reached out to touch Mia's head, checking for blood, for glass, for anything. "Don't touch her," Sophie hissed, slapping his hand away. "You brought this on us. We were fine. We were invisible. You were waiting tables and scraping by." Enzo snapped the stress, making his voice harsh. "And someone knew where you were, Sophie. That text. They knew about Mia before I did. If I hadn't walked into that bakery, you'd be dead right now. They were waiting for a clean shot." Sophie went still. The realization hit her hard. The bullet wasn't meant for Enzo. It was meant for the loose end. The car lurched again as Rocco performed a pit maneuver on one of the pursuing sedans. There was a sickening crunch of metal, then the sound of the SUV accelerating onto the highway on-ramp. 20 minutes later, the silence in the car was deafening. They had lost the tail. Rocco navigated the labyrinth of Chicago's industrial sector, finally pulling the battered SUV into a nondescript loading dock of a red brick factory. The heavy steel doors rolled down behind them, sealing them in darkness before the overhead halogen lights flickered on. "Out!" Enzo commanded, opening the door. Sophie climbed out, her legs wobbling. She held Mia, who had cried herself into a hiccuping silence. The little girl buried her face in Sophie's neck, refusing to look at the scary man in the coat. The warehouse was a fortress disguised as a ruin. Inside, however, was a high-tech command center. Leather couches, monitors on the walls, a fully stocked medical bay, and an armory. "Rocco, lock it down. No one in or out. Signal jammer on. I want to know who sent that text, and I want to know who hired the shooter." Enzo ordered, shedding his ruined overcoat. He stood there in his vest and dress shirt, looking every inch the king of a crumbling kingdom. He turned to Sophie. "Put the girl on the couch. There are blankets." "Her name is Mia," Sophie said, her voice steel. She walked over to the leather sofa and sat down, keeping Mia on her lap. She wasn't letting go. Enzo paced the concrete floor. The energy in the room crackling. He stopped in front of them, his shadow falling over his ex-wife and the child he had never known. 3 years, Sophie. He began, his voice low and dangerous. "You have exactly 5 minutes to tell me why you left before I tear this city apart, looking for answers." Sophie looked up. She was exhausted, her waitress uniform torn at the knee, her bun unraveling, but her eyes were fierce. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," she said quietly. "I left because Stefano told me to." Enzo froze. The name hung in the air like smoke. Stefano, my consigliere, my father's best friend. He came to the apartment the night you were in New York for the sit-down. Sophie said, tears finally spilling over. "He showed me photos, Enzo. Photos of a car bomb rigging. He said the hit was ordered on me. He said my being with you made you weak, made you a target. He said if I didn't disappear that night, he wouldn't be able to stop the next attempt." Enzo felt the blood drain from his face. Stefano, the man who had taught him how to tie a tie, how to shoot a gun, how to run the family. He gave me the divorce papers. He gave me a ticket to Seattle and told me to never look back, Sophie continued, her voice trembling. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks later. I couldn't call you. He said if I ever reached out, you would die. He said your enemies were watching every line." "He lied," Enzo whispered. The rage that was building in him was colder than the Chicago winter. "He didn't want to protect me. He wanted to isolate me. He wanted me married to the Vitti family to secure his own power." Mia stirred in Sophie's arms, lifting her head. She looked at Enzo with sleepy, red-rimmed eyes. She pointed a small, chubby finger at the gun tucked into Enzo's waistband. "Bad," Mia whispered. Enzo looked down at his daughter. He slowly reached for the weapon, unclipped the holster, and set it on the table far away. "Yeah," Enzo said, his voice breaking. "Bad." He knelt in front of them, bringing himself down to eye level. He looked at Sophie. "I didn't know. I swear to you, Sophie, I didn't know." "It doesn't matter now," Sophie said, wiping her eyes. "We can't stay here, Enzo. Bianca knows. Stefano knows. If that text was right, they want Mia dead because she's your heir. She complicates the Vitti merger." Enzo reached out his hand, hovering over Mia's small foot. This time, Sophie didn't pull away. He cupped the toddler's shoe, his thumb brushing over the small ankle. It was the most terrified he had ever felt in his life. "You're not going anywhere," Enzo vowed, looking from the child to the woman he had never stopped loving. "This ends tonight. I'm going to kill them. I'm going to kill them all." The warehouse was quiet, save for the hum of the server banks in the corner. Mia had finally fallen asleep on the oversized leather couch, covered by Enzo's suit jacket. It was a surreal sight, the tiny, innocent child sleeping soundly in the center of a room designed for war. Sophie stood by the kitchenette, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea Enzo had made her. She watched him. He was at the command desk phone, pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid-fire Italian. He looked older than she remembered. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his posture heavier. He carried the weight of a crown he never really wanted. He hung up the phone and rubbed his face. He walked over to her, stopping a few feet away. The magnetic pull between them was still there, undeniable and agonizing. "Stefano is at the Vitti estate," Enzo said, his voice flat. "They're celebrating. They think the sniper got you. The news is reporting a gang-related shooting with 2 fatalities. They think you and Mia are dead." "Let them think that," Sophie whispered. "Let us disappear, Enzo. Give us money, get us fake passports, and let us go. It's the only way she stays safe." Enzo stepped closer, closing the gap. He smelled of expensive cologne and gunpowder. "And what about me? Do I just go back to being a ghost? Do I marry Bianca and pretend I don't have a daughter?" "You chose this life," Sophie said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I was born into this life," Enzo corrected. "I chose you, and I let them take you from me because I was too blind to see the snakes in my own garden." He reached out his fingers, grazing her cheek. His skin was rough, warm. "I'm not letting you go again, Sophie. Not until I know you're safe. Really safe." Sophie leaned into his touch for a second before pulling back. "Enzo, we can't do this. We're not the same people." "Aren't we?" "No, I'm a mother now. My priority is her, not you. Not your war." "She is my priority too," Enzo said fiercely. "She is a Moretti." "She is a Clark," Sophie countered. "She likes strawberry ice cream. She's afraid of thunderstorms, and she sleeps with a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hops. You don't know her, Enzo." "Then teach me," he pleaded. It was a look of vulnerability she had only seen once before the night he proposed. "Let me earn it." Before Sophie could answer, the heavy steel security door at the front of the warehouse buzzed. A red light flashed on the console. Enzo's demeanor shifted instantly. The father vanished. The Don returned. He moved in front of Sophie, grabbing a shotgun from under the counter. "Rocco," Enzo barked. "I thought we were dark." Rocco ran in from the surveillance room, his face pale. "Boss, the perimeter isn't breached. It's a clearance code. A high-level one." "Who? It's your mother's code, boss." Enzo lowered the weapon slightly, confusion knitting his brow. His mother had been in a nursing home for 5 years with dementia. She didn't drive. She didn't leave her room. "Open it," Enzo commanded, but he kept the gun raised. The gears of the door ground together, lifting slowly. The cold wind swept in, bringing a swirl of snow. Standing in the doorway wasn't an army. It wasn't Stefano. It was an elderly woman, leaning on a cane, flanked by 2 men Sophie didn't recognize, men wearing suits that cost more than her annual salary. But it wasn't Enzo's mother. It was Donna Carmela Vitti, Bianca's grandmother, the matriarch of the rival family. Sophie gasped, instinctively stepping back to shield Mia's sleeping form. Enzo raised the shotgun. "Give me one reason not to paint the walls with you, Carmela." The old woman chuckled a dry, rasping sound. She walked in, unafraid of the weapon pointed at her chest. "Put that toy away, Lorenzo. If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't have knocked." "You sent the shooter," Enzo accused. "My son sent the shooter," Carmela corrected, her eyes drifting over Enzo's shoulder to where Sophie stood. "My idiot son who thinks killing a waitress and a bastard child will secure a marriage alliance. He has no honor." Enzo stepped forward. "Watch your mouth." "I am here to offer a trade, Lorenzo," Carmela said, stopping in the center of the room. She looked at Sophie with sharp, assessing eyes. "My granddaughter Bianca is a spoiled brat. My son is a fool who listens to your snake, Stefano. They are plotting to kill you tonight at the engagement dinner. A tragic accident involving a gas leak. Enzo narrowed his eyes. Why tell me? Because, Carmela sighed, leaning heavily on her cane. I am old. I am tawed of the blood, and I know something they don't. She pointed a crooked finger at the sleeping child on the couch. I know that child isn't just a Moretti, Carmela said softly. Look at her hair, Lorenzo. Look at the birthmark on her neck. I assume she has one. Sophie's hand went to her throat. Mia did have a birthmark, a small star-shaped mark behind her ear. How do you know that? Sophie whispered. Carmela smiled, but it was a sad, twisted thing. Because, my dear, 3 years ago, before you met Lorenzo, you worked at a clinic in the North Side, didn't you? A fertility clinic? Sophie nodded, confused. I was a nurse there, briefly. And you donated eggs, Carmela stated, to pay for your nursing tuition. The room went silent. Enzo looked at Sophie. Sophie looked at Carmela, horror dawning on her face. No, Sophie breathed. That was anonymous. That was closed. Nothing is closed in this city if you have enough money, Carmela said. My son wanted a grandchild. Bianca couldn't carry. We used a surrogate. But we needed an egg. We chose one from a catalogue. High intelligence, good health. Beautiful features. Carmela paused, letting the bomb drop. Mia is biologically yours, Sophie. But that DNA, half of it belongs to the donor father. She looked at Enzo. But the clinic made a mistake. Or perhaps fate intervened. What are you saying? Enzo demanded, his voice shaking. I'm saying, Carmela whispered, that Mia isn't just your daughter Lorenzo. By blood, by the twisted experiments of that clinic. She carries the genetic markers of the Vitti bloodline, too. My son was the donor. Enzo looked at Mia. Then he looked at Sophie. The world tilted on its axis. If what Carmela said was true, Mia wasn't just a secret child. She was the biological fusion of the 2 warring families. She was the heir to both thrones, and that made her the most valuable and the most endangered person in the entire underworld. Get out, Enzo whispered. I'm leaving, Carmela said, turning around. But you need to know. Stefano and my son are coming. They tracked the car. You have maybe 10 minutes. She paused at the door. Save the girl, Lorenzo. She is the only future we have left. As the door closed, the silence returned, but it was heavier now. Sophie looked at Enzo, panic rising in her chest. Is she lying? Tell me she's lying. I don't know, Enzo said, grabbing his coat. He looked at Mia with a new mixture of awe and terror. But we can't stay to find out. Rocco, prep the helicopter. Helicopter? Sophie asked. We're going to the only place they can't touch us, Enzo said, scooping the sleeping Mia up into his arms. He looked at Sophie, his eyes burning with a promise of violence. We're going to Sicily. Sophie grabbed her purse. She didn't argue. She looked at the man holding her daughter. The daughter who might be the key to a kingdom or the cause of a war. Enzo, she said, grabbing his arm as they ran toward the roof access. If we survive this, I'll tell you everything. But you have to promise me one thing. Anything. Don't let her become like you. Don't let her become like them. Enzo looked down at the sleeping girl. I'll burn the world before I let the darkness touch her. He kicked open the door to the roof, the sound of approaching sirens wailing in the distance. The wind whipped around them as the black helicopter's blades began to spin, cutting through the snowy Chicago night. They were running again. But this time they were running together. The helicopter touched down on a cliffside helipad overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea, just as the sun began to bleed orange across the horizon. Sicily. The air here was different than Chicago. It didn't bite. It caressed. It smelled of salt, wild thyme, and lemons, a stark contrast to the metallic scent of blood and snow they had left behind. Sophie stepped onto the tarmac, her legs trembling from exhaustion and the vibration of the flight. She clutched Mia, who was wide awake now, staring with wide, terrified eyes at the armed men surrounding the villa. "Welcome home, Don Moretti," a weathered man in a flat cap said, approaching with a slight bow. This was Marco, the caretaker of the Moretti ancestral estate. "Is the perimeter secure?" Enzo asked, his voice rough. He looked like a man walking through a nightmare. His tuxedo shirt unbuttoned, his expensive shoes scuffed. "As secure as Iron Boss," Marco replied, eyeing Sophie and the child curiously. "We have men in the vineyards, and the road is blocked. No one gets within 3 miles without us knowing." Enzo nodded and placed a hand on Sophie's lower back. The touch was electric possessive. "Inside. You need to eat. She needs to sleep." The villa was a fortress of stone and mahogany, built 300 years ago by men who solved problems with swords. Inside it was silent. Sophie sat Mia on a velvet sofa in the main hall while maids bustled in with trays of bread, cheese, and olives. "Where are we really?" Sophie asked, watching Enzo pour himself a glass of dark red wine. His hand was shaking slightly. It was the first sign of weakness she had seen. "Castellamare del Golfo," Enzo said, taking a long drink. "My grandfather's house. The Vitti family has influence in Palermo, but here in the hills this is Moretti land. The earth here remembers my name." He walked over to the sofa. Mia was chewing on a piece of crusty bread, watching him warily. Enzo knelt. He looked at the little girl, the girl who might be his, or might be a scientific miracle linking 2 crime families. "Hi," Enzo said softly. Mia hid behind the bread. "Who you—" Enzo flinched. The question cut deeper than the bullet that had missed him earlier. I'm Enzo." "Enzo," Mia repeated, testing the word. "Is it true?" Enzo looked up at Sophie. "What Carmela said. About the clinic." Sophie set her tea down, her hands clasping together in her lap, that nervous tick again. "I was 22, Enzo. I was drowning in student loans. The clinic offered $5,000 for egg donation. It was anonymous. I signed the papers and walked away. I didn't know it was the Vitti family, looking for a biological backup. And Mia, when I left you, when I ran..." Sophie's voice broke. "I was lonely. I was terrified. I went back to the clinic for a checkup, and I found out they had frozen embryos left over from a cycle that failed for the intended parents. I asked if I could have one. It was a legal grey area, but the doctor owed me a favour. I didn't know the sperm donor was a Vitti. I just wanted a piece of me to hold on to." Enzo stood up and paced the room, running his hands through his hair. "So she is yours, biologically?" "Yes." "And she is a Vitti, biologically?" "Yes." "And me?" Enzo asked, stopping to look at her. "Where do I fit in?" "You're the man I loved," Sophie whispered, "and you're the man who saved her life today. Biology isn't everything, Enzo. You know that." Enzo looked at Mia. The girl had the Vitti nose, maybe. But the eyes, the fire that was Sophie, and the stubbornness that felt like him. "We have to verify it," Enzo said, his voice hardening again. "Rocco is bringing a doctor from the village. We need a DNA test. Tonight. Why? Sophie stood up, protective. Does it matter? Will you throw us out if she isn't yours? No, Enzo said, stepping close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. I need to know because if she has Viti blood, the price on her head just went up to $10 million. If she is the heir to both families, Sophie, she is the most powerful person in the Italian underworld. And everyone will want to control her, or kill her. Sophie paled. She looked down at her daughter, who was happily offering a piece of cheese to a stuffed rabbit. God help us, Sophie breathed. God is busy, Enzo said, turning to the window where the moon reflected off the sea. So I'll have to do. Just then, the heavy oak doors banged open. Rocco strode in, his face grim. He wasn't alone. He was dragging a man in a torn suit, one of the perimeter guards. Boss, Rocco barked. We found him trying to send a signal from the ridge. Enzo's face went void of emotion. He walked over to the kneeling guard. Who were you signaling? The guard spat at Enzo's feet. The Viti reach is long. Moretti, they are already in Palermo. Stefano is with them. They know you are here. Enzo didn't yell. He didn't strike the man. He simply turned to Rocco. Take him to the cliffs. Let him see if he can fly. As Rocco dragged the screaming man away, Enzo turned back to Sophie. The vulnerability was gone. The Wolf of Chicago was back. Pack a bag, he ordered. Small. Essentials only. We just got here, Sophie cried. And now we leave, Enzo said, checking the magazine of his pistol. The villa is compromised. We're going to the catacombs. The catacombs beneath the monastery of San Michele smelled of damp stone and centuries of silence. For 2 days, Enzo and Sophie lived in the shadows waiting. On the third morning, Rocco descended the stone stairs, his face grim. Stefano called a summit in Palermo. He's spinning a narrative that you've gone rogue, boss. He's asking the commission to sanction a global hit on you. Enzo stood up, buttoning a fresh shirt Rocco had brought. Then I go to the summit. It's a trap, Sophie argued from the cot where Mia slept. They'll kill you on sight. Not if I have leverage, Enzo said. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to her. Rocco picked up the test results. Sophie scanned the document, her breath catching. Father Lorenzo Moretti. Probability 99.9%. How? She whispered. The clinic said, Carmela lied about the Vitti sperm to make us run. Enzo said, his eyes intense. But the clinic did make a mistake. Years ago, before my surgery, I froze a sample. They were supposed to destroy it. Instead, they used it for your cycle. He stepped closer, his voice rough with emotion. She isn't a science experiment, Sophie. She's ours. Pure blood. She is a Moretti. The truth hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Mia wasn't just a target. She was a miracle. I'm going with you, Sophie said, her voice steel. I'm the mother. I'm the witness. We finish this as a family. The summit was held in the courtyard of a 12th century castle, a black tie gala masking a trial. When Enzo walked in with Sophie on his arm, wearing a stolen emerald silk gown, the silence was deafening. They approached the head table where Don Salvatore, the head of the Sicilian Commission, sat between Stefano and Don Viti. You are bold to come here, Lorenzo, Salvatore rumbled. I came to correct the record, Enzo said smoothly. He gestured to Rocco, who slammed the DNA results onto the table. Stefano claims I stole a Vitti heir, Enzo announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard. But the child is mine, biologically, legally. The Vitti family has no claim. Don Vitti snatched the paper, reading it with widening eyes before turning on Stefano. You told me the child was my blood. You made me start a war for a stranger. Stefano stood up, sweating, his eyes darting around. It doesn't matter, Enzo is weak. He's been compromised by this woman. Better compromised by a woman than by the feds, Enzo countered cold. Rocco pressed a button on a remote. The gala's projection screen flickered to life, playing a grainy video of Stefano handing a briefcase to a known FBI agent. I've been recording my office for years, Enzo lied. It was actually footage Sophie had hacked from Stefano's cloud drive. Stefano is a rat. He's selling you all out. The courtyard erupted. The accusation of being an informant was a death sentence. Stefano cornered and, desperate, ripped a gun from his jacket. He didn't aim at Enzo. He aimed at Sophie. If I burn, you burn, Stefano screamed. Bang! Sophie flinched, waiting for the impact. It never came. Enzo had moved with terrifying speed, stepping in front of her. His body jerked violently as the bullet slammed into his chest, blooming red on his white shirt. Enzo! Sophie screamed. Enzo didn't fall. He stood like a statue, blood soaking his chest, and raised his own weapon. You missed, Enzo wheezed. Bang! Enzo's shot was perfect. Stefano dropped to the cobblestones, dead before he hit the ground. The adrenaline faded, and Enzo's knees buckled. He collapsed into Sophie's arms, sliding down to the cold stones. No, no, stay with me, Sophie sobbed, pressing her hands against the wound. Rocco, get the car. Enzo looked up at her, his vision blurring. He reached up his bloody hand, grazing her cheek. Did we win? He choked out. Yes, we won, Sophie cried. Just stay awake, please. Enzo's eyes fluttered shut, his hand falling limp. Tell Mia, I bought the cake. The beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the private room of the Palermo Medical Center. It was a steady, rhythmic drumbeat that had kept Sophie sane for 3 days. She sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her hand resting over Enzo's still one. He looked pale, the olive tone of his skin washed out by blood loss, but his chest rose and fell with a stubborn perseverance. The doctor said the bullet had missed his heart by 3 millimeters. 3 millimeters. The width of a wedding ring. Enzo's eyes fluttered open. It wasn't a dramatic awakening. It was slow, heavy. His dark eyes struggled to focus before landing on her face. Sophie, he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel. I'm here, she whispered, leaning forward to brush the hair off his forehead. I'm right here. Did I die? Not yet. She smiled through fresh tears. You're too stubborn to die, Lorenzo Moretti. He tried to squeeze her hand. His grip was weak, but it was there. Mia. She's with Rocco in the waiting room. She's eaten 3 bags of vending machine chips. She's asking for her dad. Enzo let out a breath that sounded like a laugh cut short by pain. Dad. I like that. He looked at the ceiling, then back at her. The commission. Salvatore sanctioned the hit on Stefano's crew. The Vitti family has retreated. You won, Enzo. You own the North. You own the South. You own it all. I don't care about the North, Enzo whispered, closing his eyes again. I just want the girl. And her mother. The sun over Castellammare del Golfo was warm, ripening the lemons on the trees that lined the driveway of the Moretti estate. Sophie stood on the terrace, wiping flour from her cheek. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform anymore. She was wearing a white sundress, and the flour came from her own kitchen. Not a commercial bakery, but the massive professional-grade kitchen Enzo had installed for her in the villa. "Mummy, watch." Sophie looked down to the garden. Mia, now 4 and growing like a weed, was chasing a golden retriever puppy through the grass. Chasing her was Enzo. He moved a little slower than he used to. A slight stiffness in his left side, where the scar tissue was thick. But he was laughing. The Wolf of Chicago. The man who made grown men tremble was currently letting a 4-year-old put a flower crown on his head. He caught Mia swinging her up into the air as she squealed with delight. He kissed her cheek and set her down, whispering something that made her giggle and run toward the house. Enzo walked up the stone steps to the terrace. He looked healthy tan, and for the first time in his life, peaceful. He wrapped his arms around Sophie's waist, pulling her close. "What did you tell her?" Sophie asked, leaning back into him. "I told her if she runs to Rocco, he has a cannoli for her." Enzo grinned. "You're spoiling her." "I'm making up for lost time," he said, his expression turning serious. He took Sophie's hand, kissing the knuckles. "I spent 3 years buying cakes I didn't want, just hoping to taste something that reminded me of you." Sophie turned in his arms. "And now, Enzo said, leaning down to kiss her. "I have the real thing." They stood there as the sun dipped below the Mediterranean, casting the world in gold. They had survived the bullets, the lies, and the years of silence. They were no longer running. Lorenzo Moretti had gone to buy a wedding cake and found a war. But in the end, he got to keep the 2 sweetest things in the world. And this time, there was no bitter aftertaste. What a journey. From a tense encounter in a bakery to a shootout in Sicily, Enzo and Sophie proved that second chances are worth fighting for. If you enjoyed this Mafia romance saga, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story. What did you think of the twist about Mia's DNA? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching and see you in the next story.